Good morning. Welcome to this next in a series of webinars about OpenCloudification. The count just continues to grow, but I think it's now already our seventh or eighth of the webinars, so which is a good thing. And looking forward to just continue working on the different topics in relation to OpenCloudification and the use of open cloud technologies for new and innovative developments. My name is Ulrich Salzachs. I'm the Managing Director of an association called LSEC, which is basically already since a couple of years very much focused to support innovative technology companies in developing and looking towards new types of technologies and capabilities that might be useful for the increase of their business and definitely also the increase of their capabilities when it comes to technologies. We've started this activity just less than a year ago on the with the support of two partners, IMEC and the Beacon. IMEC specifically ID Lab, Ghent University. And then from the financial support of the Flemish Commission, specifically from the agency called Vlaio. And we started this activity specifically because of the interest and needs that we saw from technology companies in getting better understanding of cloud native types of technology or just open technologies which exist, but which they are not always familiar with. So in the past, many different topics have already gone by. Today, we will have a focus specifically on very core security topic, of course, related to our activities as LSEC, being leaders in security and already active in this domain for quite a number of years. And definitely also interested in seeing that the topic of identity and access in this case is returning continuously, as it is one of those core infrastructures on the internet. But before diving into the topic, just a couple of words. So LSEC as a non-profit association has been around for more than 2 decades now. We run many different innovative developments and projects. Our latest project that we will be starting in a couple of weeks is called KISME. And it's there really to support the security, the SMEs, SMEs in throughout Europe with cybersecurity technologies and services by other SMEs, and that's the reason why I was trying to find my words a bit, because it's really cybersecurity from cybersecurity SMEs throughout Europe for SMEs in Europe which are in need of additional cybersecurity. And that is actually also very practical when it comes to, in this case, cloud technologies, but definitely also identity and access. Another activity that we started a couple of months ago is very much in relation to this. It's another project also supported by the European Commission, like KISME, and it's called Digitalis, which is there to support manufacturing companies in making their digital transition, and where also in this case, open cloud technologies are very useful, and also the topic of identity and access management is very much up to the need. On our website, you can find an overview of many of the different projects that we have, and also how to reach out to us. But it's made there also to list out the different activities that we are having today and also planning towards the near future. So do stick around, because also in next month and months, we're going to have additional face-to-face meetings on cloud native and open cloud technologies, including some workshops, and of course, all the topics during different webinars. So you can find all of the information, of course, in there. OpenCloudification is really about using open source tooling that helps and should help also businesses in getting quicker into market, but also being less attached to one single technology vendor, specifically when it comes to cloud, of course. Not that we say that therefore the commercial cloud operators are bad, or the services that they provide or technologies are bad. No, on the contrary. But we would like to provide some alternatives, and we suggest also to our partners to look into potential alternatives for this matter. So what is it about? Identity and access is, as I mentioned already, one of those core infrastructure layers when it comes to security and to definitely cybersecurity and cybersecurity online. Of course, when we are diving into clouds, we do like to take a look into the great opportunities of economies at scale, but also the computing power at scale on the other side, and the way and the easiness of deploying different types of activities. On the contrary, and on the other hand, there is of course the balance of if anybody can do this, also people within your company can actually start quite easily a new service and a new set of activities without maybe therefore you even knowing. And that might raise a little bit of a challenge sometimes. So therefore also in cloud environments and premises, the challenge of identity and access stays and sticks around. So when we take a look into a couple of these numbers, you see on the right-hand side that there's still quite a lot of breaches happening, and then the different reasons why. And then you see that 49% is really has to do with unauthorized access. So which means that in many cases, users are getting access to a specific service or activity, and maybe they should not even get that access, or they have privileged accounts and access which they should not have either. Of course, there's also a huge trend ongoing today about reducing these types of just basic levels of access through multi-factor authentication, which is definitely a good thing, but also through the concepts of zero trust, whereby you only allow basically the reverse side. So only if you know the person or the activities and also their systems is when you will be able to give them access, which is still a bit challenging to deploy, especially today. And so therefore the lower barrier would be just to give access on an easier level. But that, of course, then also impacts the way that basically in this case security breaches are there, and we do see that personal data is still being sought after by many of the criminals on a continuous basis. So therefore, definitely the need for identity and access management, and trying to cope with identities also not only of persons and entities which are basically maybe another enterprise when it comes to, for instance, supply chain management, or when it comes to APIs, but definitely also when it comes to devices, and each and every new device that you would like to attach has to also be known and being provided an identity. So as I mentioned before, these are the three partners which are actually working on the activities in relation to OpenCloudification, and all partners support, of course, all of the activities towards their end users, where we are looking towards definitely tangible results that you can use out of these activities. So we are working on different white papers on technologies that you can basically easily repackage and reuse, and which we provide also together with ID Lab, a sandboxing environment where you can test out different new types of open cloud technologies and services, and where we will be happy to guide you with some additional tooling around security, including also identity and access. So it is quite a difficult landscape to understand. This is only the perspective of the cloud native foundation, different types of open cloud technologies, which are not always freely available, but to a large extent, yes. So even cloud native can be also commercially costly. But in any case, it provides alternatives to many of the different technologies being offered. And it also gives you a bit of a view on what the landscape is in having different types of technologies in the space. So having said that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Luca, who will be your guide and host today in the next session of the next hour and a half to 2 hours. So Luca, thanks for joining in, and also thanks for doing this. And we're looking for identity and access. So I give you access here because I know that you are you.
Thank you, Rick. Let me share my screen. Now you should be able to see my presentation. Can you confirm that?
Yes, I just need to find the unmute, but yes, indeed, I can. We can.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Luca Gattobigio, and as Ulrich mentioned already, we're continuing this series of webinars, trying to explain more in the specific some of the topics related to cloud and open cloudification. In this sense, we're focusing more on the security side because we saw that there was a request on going a bit more in depth for some of the specific aspects that are related to cloud security and open cloud security. And today I'm going to talk a bit about access management and to large extent what is related to the cloud security and access control and management. And for that, we're going to also see a bit live demo on how to use a couple of the open source tools that are available and then there are in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation landscape. So just to have a feel of what it is to use one of those open source tools. Of course, I'm going to do a demonstration of very basic introduction to these tools, but I hope that this will give you an idea on how to interact with them, how they're used usually, and then start from there and probably move further if you might be interested. But let's start with the best practices more in general in cloud security. And in this case, I'll call them a recap because we had a specific webinar on that. The recordings of all our webinars are available on opencloudification.com. So you can go there and you will see the list of all our recordings. And basically you can watch them anytime, at any moment. In that specific webinar, we talked about open cloudification and cybersecurity, the best practices that are usually recommended to protect your cloud, some of the open source tools that might help you improving your cloud security, and then a little bit of an insight on AI and cybersecurity as a trending topic that we see growing in these recent latest years. Last part of the previous webinar was about cloud data security priorities in 2023. So I highly recommend you, if you're interested, to have a more general overview on how is the security related to cloud, to have a look at our previous webinar. So just to have a quick recap, I'm not going to go in depth to all the specific that we already discussed, but just to give you an overview, when we talk about cloud models, then we have different cloud models. And in that sense, we might see different security challenges. So it's very different depending on your level of responsibility. So the type of cloud model that you're handling, either an infrastructure as a service or a platform as a service, they might have some specific security challenges that you have to face compared to, for example, just a software service. And in this case, we differentiate that because probably you might address those challenges from different angles, from different perspectives. But the point is that no matter which type of security challenges you're facing, no matter what type of cloud model you're implementing, probably you will have to face some challenges related to identity and access management. Here, for example, in the software as a service type of security challenges, you can see that somehow you will have to manage everything related to unauthorized access or a potential account takeover. And to make sure of that, you need to improve the security and make sure that the access of your customers are secure. So in this sense, for software as a services, you still have to manage identity and access management as potential challenges. Sorry. And the same goes for platform as a service. In this case, you probably have interfaces and APIs that are open to the internet or that someone from the outside can reach. In that case, you have to make sure that only allowed users or employees can actually interact with them. So the lack of access controls might be a problem in your case. And the same goes for monitoring and logging, which doesn't seem immediately related, but I can ensure that it is, and we're going to talk about that as well. For infrastructure as a service as well, security policies and controls need to be implemented, and you have to avoid that hackers or malicious entities can bypass your authentication and authorization mechanisms. So in any case, you will have to deal with different security challenges, but identity and access management is something that spans across all the different cloud models. For that, we already talked about some of high-level processes that can help you enhancing your security, and this perfectly applies to identity and access management as well. So for that, it makes sense to go through them once again. And in this case, usually the first step is to identify all the security and compliance requirements and any existing control that you have in place. Based on the cloud provider, the services, and the deployment models that you're having, you have to select the best options, define the architecture for that, and then assess these security controls and see whether there might be gaps or holes in the system that you have to fill somehow to protect your, in this case, access. In this case, if there are gaps, you have to design and implement controls that will fill this gap, and then also manage the changes over time. So in this sense, I'm going to go quickly here, but again, make sure that based on your organization needs, you will identify the best security and compliance requirements. You will define an architecture that is tailor-made for your use case. And you will first assess the security controls that are available, and then potentially design and implement the controls that might help you fill the gaps that you spotted. Last step is always to manage all the changes that constantly happen in a dynamic environment like the cloud, and make sure that everything is up to date, up and running, and that follows all the new threats that are coming out basically on a daily basis. Last time we focused in 3 specific areas: the architectural part, the networking part, and the identity and access management. So quick recap for the first 2, some of the main concepts that you might be heard about are the security by design model as a system, and that at every layer puts a secure architectural design, a robust architectural design. In this case, we want to make sure to include the security at the very beginning of the designing of your entire architecture. Security shouldn't be something that comes afterwards, like you first define and design your architecture and then think about the security, but it should be something built inside your architecture. So for that, there are a set of controls and processes that can help you with that. The major cloud providers usually have what they call aware architected frameworks, which is the second part here, the second column. That is a set of guidelines that can help you building your own architecture and making sure that you're following the best practices recommended by usually the cloud providers. And this also helped with the learning part of making sure that you're up to date with the best practices, and you follow the recommendation of what they call the pillars of the architectural excellence. So making sure that your architecture is reliable, is secure, optimizes the costs, it's efficient, and so on. About the networking section, we mentioned already, and we will keep mentioning the zero trust model as a new security strategy that is growing in popularity, as it basically follows the principle of I never trust and I will always verify, no matter where the request comes from. Which means that even if you're within your firewall, so you usually would assume that everything is safe, it's better to still verify each request, even if it's coming from your internal network. And this is an approach that usually requires some extra options like mutual authentication for identity and integrity of all the devices, even if they're directly connected or if they're virtually connected in the same network. But we're gonna mention even the zero trust model later on today. And then, of course, the last section was about the identity and access management. So just some keywords here. One of the main principles that you constantly hear about is the least privilege principle. And in this case, it means to give to the user the minimum level of access or permissions that are needed to perform a specific task. So you want to make sure that the user doesn't have more permissions than what it should have. And in this case, it makes sure also that all the non-human tools as the machine or anything that might need to interact with something else in your systems only have access to what is needed. This reduces the cloud cyber attack surface because basically you're giving less permissions, less access to any type of service or user that needs to interact with your resources. It follows compliance and the audits in this sense. Can help with the stop of spread of malware or other viruses because some tools, some services won't be able to reach others unless they're authorized for that. And improves the end user productivity as well because you're making sure that your users are only focusing on what they should focus because they don't have access to anything else, basically. Another important aspect is the two types of access control that usually you can implement. The two methods are the role-based access control and the attribute-based access control. They're both valid as in they're both used depending usually on your use case. There are two ways of granting access to your users or your services. The main difference is that the role-based gives access by roles. So the role might be standard users, admin, developer, and so on. And depending on that role, a user might have more or less privileges to access specific resources. Like you don't want standard users to have access to the same resources as an admin would have, for example. While the attribute-based access control, it's more based by characteristics or attributes in this case. So anything might be an attribute, user characteristics, type of actions, object characteristics of day or time of the day, department, anything might be an attribute that you can assign to a specific user. This is more fine grade and usually is the best option when you're talking about cloud access management, but I'm gonna come back to this later. So let's go a bit more into the specific of this webinar. We want to talk about access control and management, more in general in identity and access control. So what you can expect for this section is that basically what would you think on access control and management? What are the first challenges that you might encounter while you're talking about cloud access control and management? And what are the recommendations for that? And once you have clear what might be the recommendation, what are the challenges that you're facing, the next question would be, okay, but how do I define my own policies and how do I implement them? And finally, we're going to briefly talk about how to monitor them and audit them, because those are part of the standard procedures to making sure that your access control and your management are secure. So what are the main challenges while you're talking about access control and management in the cloud? Well, the main issue or the main challenges might be that cloud services and resources might come from different or multiple vendors, which means it's not straightforward to implement your processes, your policies and procedures across the full environment. And in this sense, sometimes the full environment is not even clear because it might be complex, because it might be opaque. You might not have access to a full view of your entire environment, especially when it is connected through multiple clouds. And in this sense, since you don't get visibility, then it's difficult to understand who has access to what and how you can then therefore identify what are the security risks. And since the cloud is a scalable environment that can grow and shrink rapidly, it's also difficult to keep up the pace and making sure that the policies are also scaling up and down following the environment, not mentioning that they also need to be up to date constantly. There are solutions that can help you with that, but usually they might be expensive, especially if they're not open source. If we're talking of large and complex environments, it might be difficult to justify the cost that you will need to sustain just to have a system in place to manage it. And since those solutions might also be complex, it might also be difficult to get the most out of it. Like you will have to learn how to use the tool. You will have to train people to learn how to use it. So what are the recommendations here that you might follow? For that, we rely on the Cybersecurity Alliance Security Guidance. This is the latest volume. I already mentioned it in at least a couple of previous webinars, including the security one. This security guidance is a book that tries to help you on a high level on all the different security aspects that you might face in the cloud. And of course, there's a specific section that is dedicated to access control and management, or identity and access control. And so the recommendations that they recommend are reported here. I'm going to go through them quite quickly, and then we will focus on some of the main concepts that they mention here, so you can have a clearer view of what they actually mean. So first of all, the organizations should develop a comprehensive and formalized plan and processes for managing identities and authorization with cloud services. This makes sense, is what I constantly say, as you have to deploy your own securities based on your use case. When you're connecting to external cloud providers, try to use federation if possible. I'm going to go back to that and see what they meant with extend existing identity management. when appropriate, consider to use identity brokers, which are specific software or vendors that focus on the identity aspects, and it might be a third-party solution that you will rely to manage all the identity in your different clouds, for example. Cloud users are responsible for maintaining the identity provider and defining identities and attributes. So it's something that the cloud user must do. It's better to know exactly how to do this. The users of the cloud also should prefer multi-factor authentication. We're going to go through that quickly as well. Privileged identities should always use multi-factor authentication. This is because with that, we can improve the security of the accounts. Again, we're going to talk quickly about MFA. We should develop an entitlement matrix for each cloud provider and project, and put an emphasis on the access to the metastructure and the management plane. I'm going to briefly describe also what's an entitlement matrix, and then translate those matrices into technical policies, basically as a first step to then deploy your own policies based on your use case. If needed to choose, then prefer attribute-based access control over the role-based, as I briefly mentioned. But again, we're going to go through this. Cloud providers should offer internal identities and federation using the open standards. There are standards available for the security communication, specifically related to identity and access control. And as a last recommendation, as they say, there are no magic protocols because it depends on your use case. So I'm going to start indeed with the first and the last of these recommendations. Since there are no magic protocols, each use case is different. There's nothing that we can do about it. Like there's always a first step, which is try to understand as much as possible what are your needs, what are your potential threats, what are your risks, and then start from there to develop your security. This is not strictly related to identity and access management. This might be related to security in general of your cloud. But there we also mentioned federation, or in this specific case, federated identity management. So what is it exactly? It's basically the process of allowing one or more users to access different applications or services without having the need to re-authenticate every time. So imagine that you're a user that needs to log in different clouds or different services that are spread over several environments. Instead of the need of logging in on each of the specific service, you will do it once, and then basically relying on one identity provider, you will be able to log in without re-authenticate each time on all the different applications. And in this sense, usually you have two entities here, the identity provider, which is the one that will authenticate you, and the relying party, which is the service that you want to log in. And the relying party will first ask to the identity provider to grant for you that you are the users that you claim to be, basically. So the identity provider is the one that authenticates the users, and the relying party is the one that will trust these assertions and will allow the user to access the application or the service that we're talking. Multi-factor authentication, I believe everyone experienced at least what multi-factor authentication means, especially nowadays. Most of the services, when you log in the cloud or in your bank accounts, they're usually requiring at least a second or even more than two pieces of evidence to verify your identity. Is usually a notification on your phone, an SMS, You might have a device that gives you a number and so on. So if possible, cloud users should always enable multi-factor authentication. Not even cloud users. It's a standard practice that should be implemented as many times as possible. But that should be especially valid for cloud accounts, especially if you're considering federations. So having multi-factor authentication that is used as an attribute that can be passed through the different services that you want to log in. What I mean here and what they mean is that with multi-factor authentication as an attribute, the service that you're logging in will receive as metadata the fact that you have a multi-factor authentication. And so it can use it to ask you for a second piece of evidence to let you log in. And this enhances security. Basically, with that, you can improve the overall security because all the services now, starting from one that provides this as an attribute, will be able to implement multi-factor authentication, or at least use it. The advantages are quite straightforward. In this case, you increase security. This works in general for multi-factor authentication. You will protect your cloud accounts because unauthorized access are less likely, since they need to have multiple pieces of evidence that it's you logging in. This will reduce the risk of data breaches because, again, attackers cannot gain access that easily to your cloud account. But this also follows and improves your compliance because more and more often the regulations of industry regulation of various sectors are actually requiring to enable multi-factor authentication in any case. So you're also following the standard regulations. We also mentioned to prefer attribute-based access control over the role-based one. As I said, you're still free to use both of them. The recommendation is to use the attribute-based mostly because it's more flexible compared to the other one. And the example here might be quite simple. So imagine that you're implementing role-based access control. So you're assigning permissions based to a role. So this is the easiest way to do that. You define a role, like a user, a standard user, and then everyone who is assigned to that role can have the same access to the same resources. But let's say that one of your users, for any reason, need to access another specific resource that usually is not associated with the standard role. And then it might not be able in the first instance, which means either you change the role or assign the role to that specific user, another one, which might not be exactly the role that would be intended for him. And in this sense, he might get more permissions than the ones that are needed for the specific case. And we're going against the least privilege logic in this sense. Or you create another role that is specifically intended for that specific use case. But then with the growing of your environment, with the growing of your users, it might happen that this will constantly repeat, like specific use cases that will require specific attention based on specific needs, which means creating another role and then another role and then another role. So as you can see, it's not that flexible. While if you're talking about attributes, you're assigning anything to the users that might be relevant for the specific use case. Let's say, for example, you have a standard user that wants to access some budgeting, and then you will give him an attribute that he will be allowed to access a specific resource if he's part of the financial department, for example. So you don't have to change anything, just assign a specific attribute to him, and he will be able to access that specific resource. There's not only flexibility. Flexibility is usually the main point, but in that sense, there's an improvement on the scalability part, because again, you don't need to create and manage a large number of roles that might increase. You're just assigning the specific attribute to the specific user. Is less likely to be affected by the changes because you're mostly focusing on attributes, not on the role or the resources. And since you have a more granular access control policies on that, you can say that the security might be on overall improved. Another important topic that we mentioned is the entitlement matrix, or sometimes refer to it as the access right matrix or the access control matrix. It is basically a table that you will use, a matrix indeed, where you would list all the users or the groups of users, it depends on your organization. And there you will list all the resources that they are authorized to access, the action that they are authorized to perform, and all the resources. So why would you do that? From one hand, it's useful to track the various users and to see what are the resources that they have access to. And with that, you can make sure that they only have access to the resources that they need to do for their specific job. In this sense, a visual overview of your user and all the resources is quite more immediate and can help you understanding if something is going wrong. And on the other hand, that's also useful to identify potential security risks, because again, you can see whether a specific user have access to resources that it shouldn't have. So entitlement matrices can be helpful. It's something that is recommended to use. First, to mitigate the security risks, as I said, you're tracking your users' access to the resources. So you can identify and potentially mitigate all the security risks that are there. Again, regulations might require the organization to have this sort of tracking of the user's access, especially when we're talking about sensitive data. So those might be the tools or the controllers that might help you with this type of requirement. And you might optimize resource usage because, again, you're understanding and you're implementing something that shows you exactly which user have access to which resources, which means that you're making sure that all the resources are assigned efficiently only to the people that need to be there. This concludes more or less the section in which we talk about recommendation. But as I said, once you do that, the question would be, okay, now I know what are the challenges. I know how to tackle them, at least on a high level. But at a certain point, you have to actually define and implement those access control policies. So what are the steps here? What are the different procedures that I might follow to making sure that my access control policies are correct? I would summarize them in 4 steps, which the first 2 are to identify and define your access control policies, the one that you want to do. And again, as mentioned already, it depends on your use case. So again, once again, we're talking of the high-level steps. First of all, identify your needs and then define them based on your use case. The third step then would be to physically implement them. And the last step is keep them up to date, monitor them, check that everything works as it should be, and make sure that you have a full overview of what's going on. So if we start with the defining process, the first 2 points are about identifying what are the assets that you want to protect. This might be physical or digital. It applies to both. And in this sense, you will have to identify what are the threats for those assets, which again means not only external threats, but you might consider internal threats as well. And once you identified those assets and the relative threats, what you will do is define the access control policies that might help you mitigating those threats. And a good way to do that would be answering to the standard questions that could be, who can access the assets that I want to protect? What can they do with these assets? What can they, when can they access them? And where can they access the assets from? And in this sense, I would add also why they would access it. But yeah, more or less, you have an idea on what are the questions that you would ask yourself, and then you will have to answer with your policies, with your access control policies. And once you identified what are the assets, once you identified what are the threats, and then you defined, then the next step is to implement those access control policies, which means using security controls, examples, the authentication tools, authorization tools, account management, logging in and auditing, which is partially of the monitoring, so the fourth step. And there are plenty of them. Again, it depends on what you identified and what you defined as your access control policies. But usually you will have to think about user identities and access privileges, because that's something that goes through the whole cloud environments, no matter what type of model, as I mentioned at the very beginning. So in this sense, you will need an identity and access management system, an IAM. The system should be used to manage user accounts and to assign the permissions to users. In the next section, I'll show you one of those open source tools that is basically an identity and access management system. So you have an idea, but it's quite straightforward. Basically, you manage your users, you can give them permissions, and you're making sure that only the users that should have access to a specific resource will have access to that specific resource. Another recommendation is to use strong authentication that works for everything, like a combination of factors to verify the identity of our users, like password and security questions and so on. The logic of least privilege is something that we already mentioned. A good way to do that is granting users the permissions that they only need for a specific task. And in this sense, that's also why attribute-based access control makes more sense, because it's less generic, it's more tailor-made to the specific user. Regularly review your user access privileges, because things might change over time. And this is a standard practice that should be done on a regular basis. So you're making sure that the permissions are still up to date with the needs of the specific users. Password manager might be useful, especially when you have to create and also manage passwords for all the different accounts that a user might have. Education, that's part of the security landscape in general. It's like a generic concept in which you want to teach to your employees or to your users the security best practices. And this, of course, applies to users' identities and access privileges. Like teaching them, not sharing the passwords, being careful when you need to click on links, when you receive potential spam emails and so on. And potentially integrate a SIEM system, so a security information and event management, to help you monitoring and analyzing all the user activities, for checking for unauthorized access, breaches, and so on. This is a standard recommendation and an improvement on your overall security system. We also mentioned the security information and event management systems in other webinars, but I'll be happy to talk about it more if needed or if you're interested. Okay, some extra recommendations in this sense about user identities and access privileges. A good way to do that, especially if your environment is large, is to use a centralized IAM system. In this sense, you will have one place that manages the different login systems or all the authentication systems spread over your full environment. It's easier to manage both the user accounts and all the permissions across the entire organization. And it also gives you a better overview of what's going on because you have just one place to look at, specifically for user identities, of course. Zero trust approach, this makes sense, and this will be repeated again. When I mentioned it before, I was talking about making sure that you don't trust other services, for example. Well, you can apply the same logic to users. So assume that no user is trusted by default. So you will require them to authenticate every time that they need to access a specific resource, which doesn't mean that they have to log in constantly, but you want to make sure that their authentication is approved by someone. For example, was I was talking before about federation that would work in any case, because it would be the identity provider that will let you log in without putting username and password constantly. But in this sense, the service won't trust you immediately, but it will ask the identity provider every time for your authentication. Another approach that might be taken, and it's another common practice, is to use a risk-based approach. So the level of security should change based on the sensitivity of the data that is being accessed. Like if you need only to interact with a few sets, relatively not important data, and you're logging in from your standard workplace within the organization at the common hour that you usually would access to a specific resource, then probably your username and password might be enough. While if you need to access sensitive data and maybe you're from a location that usually is not your common location or a different hour during the day, maybe it might be better to ask for a second piece of information to verify that it's you. And another recommendation is to use a layered approach as a combination of security controls for both user identities and access privileges. Last steps of this 4 steps recommendation list is to, in the end, monitor and audit the access activity. So make sure that you configure something that can help you with the login part and the auditing part. So you want to have a system in place that tracks the user activities and record it in logs, because with that you can then backtrack what happened in case of emergencies, let's call them, and you want to make sure that you have the full view of what happened. And in this sense, then you will have to define what are the events that you want to log. Like it might be a failed login attempt, successful login, every time that a user accesses sensitive data, and so on. It depends on the use case. Again, if you see these steps, you might recognize that the pattern is still the same. Identify, define what to do, and then implement, and then review as a monitor them. So you will have to then store the logs in a secure location, making sure that you can access them when it's needed and they don't get lost. And on a on a regular basis, you will have to look for to review these logs and make sure that you will look for the specific sign in this case that you want to investigate, like unauthorized access or access to sensitive data. And if needed and if necessary, you make sure that you will take corrective actions to those unauthorized access, for example. So this might be implemented by disabling user accounts. You might need to change password. There might be some suspicious activities that you need to investigate and so on. In this sense, the using of a centralized, in this case, logging system might make it easier to collect and analyze the logs that are coming from all the different environments. So again, the idea here is to have a centralized place that you have to look in just one place, instead of starting to go on each section, on each part, or on each cloud of your environment to separately check all of them. The SIEM system can be definitely useful for the auditing and monitoring part. It helps with the collection of data, the analysis of data, and all the correlate logs that might come from any type of source. Usually you have deployed agents that might do the job even automatically for you across your entire environment. The risk-based approach applies for the monitoring and auditing part as well, because it should be based on sensitive data and who is accessing it. In this sense, it's obvious that if you have sensitive data, maybe you might collect more logs on it, making sure that there are more monitoring systems to check that the data is accessed only by the users that they have access to. And again, the layered approach, which means the combination of monitoring and auditing controls, needs to be used to protect your access activity. And more in general, about access control policies, it might make sense to involve the stakeholders, making sure that the policies are effective and that everyone is aware of them and supports them following what the policies might require. So it's important to have everyone on board and up to date with everything that your organization would require in sense of access control policies. The risk-based approach can be perfectly applied as a general recommendation to tailor-made the policies to the specific risks that your organization is facing, because it might differ from organization to organization, of course. And the policies need to be constantly up to date, which means constantly reviewing them, constantly update them, making sure that the risks are still addressed by the policies, making sure that if there are changes over time, you will adapt your policies accordingly. Okay, this concludes the second section. Now, what I wanted to show today is a very brief live tool of a couple of open source tools. One for the identity and access management, and one for the policies more in general. And to do that, I'm gonna just give you an idea of what are the, let's say, the first steps to take if you want to use those tools. The main goal here is to give you a very brief overview of what would be on using these tools. And if you are interested in any of the two or other similar tools that might do might perform the same tasks, we are happy to continue it with you and maybe go a bit more in depth and provide more guidance in this sense. So today I'm gonna focus on these two tools. On the right side, you see Keycloak. It's an identity and access management tool. It got the CNCF incubating label, so something that is not yet production ready, but it is worth to follow because it's gaining popularity, and the main reason is it's quite straightforward, it's immediate, and provides a lot of customization that can be adapted to your specific use case. While on the left side, we have Open Policy Agent. I do realize that the screenshot here is quite blurred, so I hope you can read it. In this case, we're talking of a service that is already graduated, it's production ready, it's granted that it has everything that might be needed for the organization to be already used right now. So I'm gonna start with Keycloak. Again, as I said, it's an open source identity and access management solution. It can provide the central management system that you can use to manage users and roles and permissions and attributes and so on across all the applications that you might have. Can be deployed both on premises or in the cloud. And it supports all the different authentication methods, including the single sign-on methods, the social logins, password-led authentication. The list is quite long, and can be used as an integration with other identity and access management solutions, which means that if you're already relying to your cloud provider for that, there's probably an integration that you can use to connect both of them. And today I'm just going to show you how to use it as a centralized system that can provide user authentication, and maybe show it how to connect to an external application, for example, logging in with Keycloak. So it will be our identity provider in this case. So to do that, I'm gonna switch to my laptop. Here you can see that in this case, I am using a container, because this was the easiest way, since I'm going to show you how to use it. I'm using an image that is usually intended not for production, but for development and for testing. In this case, I'm deploying a container with an image of Keycloak, which is available locally, but I can also use it to authenticate with other sources that are available on the internet, for example. So once you deploy the container, you have something that you can access as your admin interface. Okay. And of course, I'm keeping the standard, the default settings. So in this case, it requires to change the password, but that's out of the scope for today. What I'm going to show you is how Keycloak works. And in this case, you can see this is the interface for an admin. The master, what they call realm, which is basically a tenant, is what it's usually used to manage Keycloak itself. So the first thing that they would recommend you to do is to create another realm. And in this case, let's say we're gonna create a test realm for that. So this is my tenant. Here I can create users that they might be able to access it. And then I will connect to clients or to other services, for example, to show, to allow them to authenticate using Keycloak. So the first step to do is therefore create a user. And in this case, we will have a test user. As you can see, then you can put a lot of information, a lot of data like email, because you can then ask for email verification. Groups are a set of roles and attributes that you can do to fine-grade the permissions that a specific user can have. I'm gonna go quickly through all the different steps, but in this case, I'm just creating a standard user. We call it test user with my name. Of course, it will need a password, which is going to be terrible but useful for the moment. Can define whether I want the password to be temporary or permanent. If it's temporary, once the user accesses it, it can change it by itself. And what I can also add, since, as I said, it's highly configurable, I can define whether, for example, a user can register by itself. If want to implement if you want to implement, you can add the forgot password process to help a user to get his password or change his password if he forgot it. The remember me keeps you signed in. You can use the email as username. You can log in with your email and so on. There is the key for the realm, the various keys that are active. This is as a standard practice, usually you would constantly rotate your keys on a monthly basis, for example. So what you can do is actually manually or automatically generate your keys that you want to change. You can define tokens, you can define client policies. For the authentication, you can define what are the flows. With flows, they define all the various procedures that you might follow to require a specific action. For example, you want OTP, you want to show terms and conditions, you want to ask for password updates, you want to put specific policies, and you can rely on other identity providers if you want. For example, let's say I want to use GitHub as a potential authenticator for Keycloak. And in this sense, you already have available the URL that you might, the endpoint basically of GitHub to let you log in with GitHub instead of with your Keycloak credentials. So we created a test user. So now if I go on the realm, which would be the name of my realm is test realm. So I'm putting, in this case, it's localhost because it's the container on my machine, realm/test realm / account. And from there, I can log in with the test user. And the password is, again, not that safe, but you can see that I logged in. And here I can check my personal infos. I can set some account security details, see what applications I logged in. And this is also customizable from the admin, which means that I can provide more or less options to the users themselves. For example, to manage their own passwords, to change implementations, and so on. So if we go back to the admin console, Now what I want to do is show how to use it to log in on another application. And in this case, the most straightforward way is to use what Keycloak offer as a test application. They have it on your website. And in this case, this is an application that you can log into, and the first thing that they will ask is where you're getting the identity provider from. In this case, it comes from my localhost. The realm that we have is the test realm. The client that I want to log in is the test client. I'm going to create that as well. So what I'm going to do is create a new client, my test client, making sure that the standard flow, for example, which is the OpenID type of authentication, is enabled, and I can provide direct access to the users that wants to authenticate. And here I'm going to put the URL of the website. So in this case, the Keycloak application as the URL that I want to log in to, and the web origin, which in this case is keycloak.org. So in this case, I have saved, now I have it, my test client with the OpenID Connect protocol available for this realm, which means that if users are allowed, I can let them log in the application with my credential in this application. And since I was already logged in here, basically I just click to sign in, as you can see, the user code Luca is now authenticated and has access to the application. And I didn't show, but basically for each user, then you can assign attributes on an attribute-based access control. You can define roles, you can assign roles, you can create groups that could be a combination of both, which I didn't mention much, but could be a potential option. So instead of necessarily go with roles or necessarily go with attributes, you can do a combination of both, which it's still fine-grained and might be useful. And then provide the sessions, identity providers, and so on. As I said, the tool is quite straightforward. The important part here is that there's a lot based on what are your needs and based on your specific use case. This might be useful to manage the identity and the access management more in general of your entire environment. So if you're interested, you can start from here, and then maybe we can also help you go a bit more in depth. Now back to the presentation. The second tool, as I mentioned, is the Open Policy Agent. I already mentioned this because was getting more and more popular in the last months, maybe years at this point. And it became a graduated project that is specifically intended for, in general, cloud-native applications and cloud-native infrastructures. It has its own declarative policy language, which is called Rego. But I'll show you a very, very brief example, a very simple example on how to use it. It's quite flexible because it can be deployed and it's cloud native, but then it can interact with almost everything, as in the various system and frameworks, as long as they're using REST APIs, gRPCs, or any native libraries. Ulrich, could you mute? your, thank you. So today I'm going to show you an integration that OPA has. So the logic, how it works, has been already presented, but I will go through it quite quickly. Imagine that you have a service or a user that sends a request to access a specific application or a service, or to perform any type of task. Then the request that will be a policy input in JSON will be sent to OPA first. Once it receives it based on the policy that it sends, it will be processed, and it will be returned the output whether the user is allowed or not to access or to perform a specific task, or to access a specific page or resource in general. So it's something like in the middle tool that helps you following the policies that you can define. And what I wanted to show today, as I was saying, is an integration that OPA has with Kubernetes. And the integration is called Gatekeeper. It's still OPA. What it does is extend the functionalities that the standard OPA would have specifically for Kubernetes. So it's a bit more easy to use. So what I'm gonna show you today is that I will manage my Kubernetes cluster. I already installed in it Gatekeeper. I'll show you the command is one line of code. And then I will apply one specific policy, a simple one, that is called constraint in this case, which will block any type of request, even for allowed users, to deploy a new namespace. That would be the example, if there isn't a specific label that defines it. So first things first, I'm using one of the clusters that we made available for everyone in our Cloud Native Lab, which is our sandbox environment. If you're interested to learn more about this, in one of the previous webinars, we presented Cloud Native Lab. I believe that back in that days, it had a different name, but again, you can find also everything that explains to you how to use it, how to create your account, and how to perform all the steps to being able to use Kubernetes in OpenCloudification.com. So make sure that you have a look there. Once again, after creating your account, you're free to use and create all the clusters that you want to test. They're completely free and managed by our partner IMEC. So in this case, I created a Kubernetes cluster with our Cloud Native Lab environment. As you can see here, I have just one control plane and one worker machine with some gigabytes of memory and some cores. I already downloaded and configured my kubectl, so I can use it in my environment. To do that, I quickly need to log in. Okay. And for example, we can check if the nodes that I just mentioned are there. So yeah, as you can see, I can reach and I can control my Kubernetes. I have admin credential. I can do anything on my Kubernetes environment. I already installed, so I'm not gonna go through the installation process, but basically Gatekeeper has one command line that you have to implement directly in Kubernetes. And it shows you, it allows you to immediately deploy a working instance, a working pod of Gatekeeper in your Kubernetes cluster. So Oh, yeah, of course, no pods in this case. So aside for the Kubernetes standard systems that are already there for management, we have the two gatekeeper system in their namespace, which are basically the auditor and the controller manager. So the two entities that will allow us to include policies in our Kubernetes. And as I was saying, what I'm going to do right now is show you how to implement those policies. And in this sense, I'll show you a very, very simple example. What I'm going to apply first is what is called a constraint template. This is standard Kubernetes language. I'm using YAML for that. Without going too much into details, what I'm doing is define the template of my future constraints, so my actual policies. In this case, this is just a schema for the parameters that I will have to then include once I want to add a new constraint. In this sense, the constraint would be, as I said, that I will have required labels type of constraint, which means that a new namespace that would be created in my Kubernetes environment will have to have a gatekeeper label. So I'm applying to the namespaces a specific parameter that I want to be there, a label that calls gatekeeper. And for that, I created a very, very short examples. This is also basically following some of the basics tutorials that are available on Gatekeeper. Here I have a request to create a new namespace, but as you can see, I call it my bad namespace, but as you can see, there are no labels referring to Gatekeeper. So what I'm expecting here is that Gatekeeper will not allow me, even if I'm an admin, to deploy a new namespace because the label is missing. And then we have a new another request to create a new namespace, which in this case has the Gatekeeper label, OPA in this sense. So what I'm gonna do is, first of all, put the label template in place. Now Kubernetes knows that I will create new constraint based on the template that I provided. And in this case, so I'm gonna apply the constraint that tells Kubernetes, or in this case, Gatekeeper, to not allow anyone that has that wants to create a new namespace if there isn't the Gatekeeper label. So if we now try to create a new namespace with a bad version of it, so without the label, I got an error message, even if again I'm allowed, which states that it's forbidden because the Gatekeeper validation system is basically denying my request and is explaining that I have to provide a label called Gatekeeper. If I do the same procedure again with a good namespace, so in this case, I'm providing the label as requested in the policy, the namespace get created. So I can show you that among the namespaces now, there is the one that I asked. Now, this example shows something very, very simple, like a namespace. But imagine that with this type of policies, you can put almost everything in there. For example, specific users cannot deploy on specific environments, like the deployment environment or the production environment is not for developers that usually work for test environment. Specific pods might not request too much resources for just one type of application. User access based on time, it's quite configurable and it's definitely interesting. If you're interested in this sense as well, feel free to contact me or us in general, and I'm sure that we can go a bit more in depth in OPA as well. Okay, this basically concludes my presentation today. Just to quickly recap, we went through the best practices, more generic for cloud security. It was more revised of what we already mentioned in the specific webinar available on our website. So feel free to check that as well if you're interested in more details in the cloud security aspects. We talked about access control and management, and there we defined how to, what are the challenges related to cloud access control and cloud management. We provided some recommendations and steps on how to define your policies, how to identify them, and then how to audit and monitor them. And the last section was a brief demo on identity and access management tools. So first case, identity and access management, Keycloak, and second example, OPA, so Open Policy Agent, or more specifically for policies. The demo was focusing on the integration with Kubernetes. Okay, if there are questions or comments, I'm here. Feel free to reach us even later if you're interested in something more specific in any of the topics. You can always reach us. We will also provide everything on the website, even a short guide to replicate the two demos that I showed it today.
Okay, super. Thank you very much, Luca. Excellent overview and presentation. Yeah, I think it's inspiring at least to see that many of those tools are actually not too hard to follow and to integrate. So it's actually a pretty good idea to start testing it yourself and trying to see for your next application, at least to sense out whether these types of open source tools could very well be applicable. I don't see any questions being raised for the time being, so that's yeah, I wouldn't say a good thing, but it's definitely an indication that the presentation was clear, and that's probably a good perspective for people to start further thinking about things. Maybe one thing to consider, and maybe that's also a topic for a next session or something of a kind, is how easily the tools also integrate with other types of applications or web services or other systems that require identity. And I mean, of course, whether you use an Azure AD environment, which is slightly more common, or LDAP as directories, whether it's also as easy to integrate with this one. So that's maybe something that you can quickly reply on, but it's also maybe a topic that we can address at a later point in time.
Yeah, definitely.
And then maybe another topic, as I opened up the session, saying that yeah, it's not only about persons, it's also about the use of systems, integrating, for instance, also APIs and using different identity schemes for application integrations. It could also be an idea to look into this and also how we could facilitate this towards devices. And saying that, I would like also to draw the attention to our next activities. So our next webinars will actually be on the topic of, and not only webinars, by the way, it's actually face-to-face meetings and workshops, will be much more on the topic of devices. Integrating edge devices and developing edge devices on the basis of cloud-based technologies, open cloud technologies, which will be hosted by our partner ID Lab in Ghent, IMEC. And you're of course cordially invited to participate there in person. You can find the details both on the LSEC website, lsec.eu Digital Security Catalyst, or you can go to the OpenCloudification website, opencloudification.com, which has all the details and also the links to the registration forms. So we definitely welcome you there and to join in and to listen up on the integration of the devices. And then maybe indeed, Luca, we could maybe use that topic also to investigate a little bit more how we could use those edge devices and integrate them also on the basis of identity and access, and make some demonstrations there how that could work. That's then again for another line of activities. Furthermore, yeah, go ahead.
I see there's a question, so sorry if I interrupt you, Ulrich, but I will
perfectly fine.
I will answer the question. So the question is Keycloak mature for production environments? As I said, I explained, I think, in one of the previous, or probably one of the first webinars that we have, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation landscape attributes some labels on the different applications that they host as like cloud native applications. And at this stage, Keycloak got the incubating label, which means not yet ready for production environment, at least for their standards, but it's getting there. So see it as something as it's worth it to follow, because very soon, usually graduated, which is the highest label that you can get from the CNCF landscape, graduated applications always pass through the stage of incubating, and it's quite not immediate, but it's fast, the passage from incubating to graduated. So not yet, at least for their standards. I'm quite sure that there are some organizations that they use it already. There's nothing wrong with it. If you see that it perfectly fits to your needs, then Keycloak, it's probably one of the best options. And then I see that there's another question asking if there's production.
Just quickly, maybe on the previous one. I think on day-to-day operations, we do see quite a lot of Keycloak already being used into operations today. Yeah. So I would say yes, it has passed this level of questionable, commercially applicable. So yeah, it is being used in production quite often, actually, more and more that we can see.
Yeah. And to answer the second question, which is if there's any production environment ready alternative, in that sense, there are several options, not necessarily open source, of course. One of the identity and access management tools that I mentioned again in one of the previous webinars is OpenIAM, which is also quite famous and quite used. And in that sense, you have either the open source version, which is the community edition, or the paid application that it's more, it's maintained by the developers themselves, and it provides some extra features. This is also an open source app that is used more and more often. But in that sense, you can have a look on the cloud native landscape, for example, just to have a view of what are the graduated tools that are already available. then, as I said, most of the times it depends on your specific use case. So you have a look on 2 or 3 different tools and see whether there's one that might be perfectly fitting with your needs. I hope that
That's maybe also
the question.
I think you did. I think it's also maybe a good and interesting topic to raise for the next session. Is to do a bit of a comparison between those 3 systems, and I may also look into an alternative like ForgeRock, putting them next to each other and seeing what to actually look for, what the different best practices are, also a bit on the basis of our experiences and the things that we can see in from the users looking into that.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you've answered all the questions, and you passed all of the slides. So thank you very much, Luca. And so looking forward to the next session then, and also looking forward to meet the attendees here in person in the next occasion.
Maybe if I can add, Ulrich,
yes.
For the workshop that we're gonna have basically in 1 month time, it's gonna be about the IoT devices management and connection to the cloud. In this sense, follow what we mentioned in the event page on our website, because there's also an introduction to the same topic that we had as a previous webinar, which is again recorded and held by our colleague Merlin. So there you can have all the theoretical explanation if you're already curious and you want to start understand what we're gonna do in the workshop. So it might be useful to also follow that and have a look at that.
Yeah, and on top, the location is going to be Herentals, so it's going to be on a different location than the ones that we have used. So do check that also on our website, because that might be convenient if you're starting to join into the session. Okay, thank you also for that. Any other final comments?
I think we're good.
Alrighty. Thank you very much all for joining in, and wish you a very good and interesting final quarter after this holiday period, and looking forward to seeing you on October 3rd, then in this case.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Bye.